Good afternoon. Welcome to the Museum Studies program at the University of Michigan's Museums at Noon event. I'm Deirdre Hennebury, and I am the Associate Director of the program. And I'm really excited to be able to welcome you to this special event. Before I introduce our guest, I would like to just take a minute or two here to showcase for you a couple of the events that we have coming up later in our winter programming. Whoops. Sorry, it advances a little quick. There we go. This is just a kind of skeletal version of our program, so I encourage you to check the Museum Studies webpage, where we'll have more comprehensive descriptions of these events and all of the fantastic participants that we will have joining us and making for a very rich program. So we have a couple of panel discussions dealing with colonial archives and decolonial projects in February. In March, we are welcoming our visiting scholar for the winter semester. This is Erica Lehrer, coming from Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. And then to close out and bookend our winter programming, we have another Museums at Noon event at the end of March. So please do check our webpage and join us for any or all of those. I also, for any graduate students who might be joining us today who are interested in museum studies as part of their program, please do consider joining us for our virtual open house in a week's time. We'd love to meet you and answer any questions that you might have about our program. And so now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our guest for today's Museum at Noon presentation. Stephanie Gandulla is a maritime archaeologist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. This is the only freshwater marine sanctuary in the United States. Growing up in southwestern Montana, Stephanie has always loved the outdoors, whether underwater or in the mountains. Prior to her training as a maritime archaeologist, she worked as a freelance writer and photographer, a newspaper columnist, and as a member of the exhibits team at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. She has been a member of archaeological expeditions and research in the Great Lakes, Sweden, Jamaica, American Samoa, and throughout the southeastern United States. These projects have ranged from 17th century European shipboard life to Civil War shipbuilding and armament. Stephanie currently resides in Alpena, Michigan, otherwise known as Shipwreck Alley. In addition to leading research expeditions, Stephanie manages media relations and community outreach for the sanctuary. In this role as an educator, Stephanie guides students of all ages in programs involving marine technology, marine debris, and of course, maritime heritage. Utilizing remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, she helps bring science, technology, engineering, and math concepts to life for students. Partnering with local high school students, she has coordinated efforts to launch a grassroots campaign focused on plastic pollution awareness and prevention. As the director of the Thunder Bay International Film Festival, Stephanie has committed herself to communicating important ocean and Great Lakes issues to new audiences. She's on the governing council for the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation and works to change the conversation about climate change to one of hope and action. Since Stephanie learned to scuba dive in Alaska over 20 years ago, she has become an NOAA scientific diver, a certified free diver with Free Diving Instructors International, and a Professional Association of Diving Instructor. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing your work and expertise with us today.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm going to share my screen now.
If I can stop sharing, there we
go. Okay. Well, yes, thank you so much for that warm introduction. Goodness, has it been over 20 years since I've been diving? That makes me sound a little old. We're really excited to have the Sanctuary invited to museums at noon, and that lineup of programs looks fascinating, and I hope to join some of them through the next couple of months. Today, I'm going to give an overview of NOAA's Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, share some stories about the shipwrecks that we work to protect, and then open it up for questions and discussion about both our visitor center, so our museum on land, and the underwater museum that is the 4,300 square miles in Lake Huron. So we know where we are here in the beautiful Great Lakes, and as the audience probably is well aware, over 10,000 years ago, the Great Lakes were carved by glaciers and filled with water. They cover 94,000 square miles and hold over 6 quadrillion gallons of water. And if you were to spread across the 48 states, that would be almost 10 feet deep, that water. And it's 21% of the planet's supply of fresh surface water. The Great Lakes have over 10,000 miles of shoreline. So clearly a very important natural resource for our planet, but also an important cultural resource. They're a natural highway, and over 30,000 commercial vessels have sailed the Great Lakes, and it's estimated that there are somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 shipwrecks in all 5 of the Great Lakes. But it wasn't until 1825, with the construction of the Erie Canal, that the Atlantic Ocean was connected to the Great Lakes, and the canal enabled ships to travel from busy ports on the eastern seaboard, like New York City, to Great Lakes ports, and they brought goods and materials and, of course, people west to a growing America. The Great Lakes were the world's busiest waterway for a time, and I will say they are still one of the world's busiest waterways. It's just when you look out in the beautiful shoreline and out to the fresh water, you're not going to see the hundreds of schooners. Instead, it takes just a handful of freighters to haul the same amount of cargo, but still very important for our global economy. So located in Lake Huron and designated in 2000, Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary protects one of the nation's best preserved and historically significant collection of shipwrecks. Within the 4,300 square miles lie 99 is the number, so almost 100 known shipwreck sites. And we estimate, and research indicates, that as many as 100 additional sites remain to be found in this vast maritime cultural landscape. The diverse collection represents over a century of commerce in the Great Lakes. And I love this image here, zooming in on it, where you can actually see the number of shipwrecks within the sanctuary's boundaries that are outlined there with this gray line. So the collection represents over a century of commerce in the heart of North America, and it includes wooden schooners that date to the early 19th century, like this one here, the Northwestern, which lies at about 135 feet deep. One of my favorite dive sites, sank in, I think the year was 1855, to modern massive steel freighters. Together, these shipwrecks tell a story of a time when schooners and steamers ruled the lakes, and through transport and trade fueled a developing industrial nation and economy. But individually, they tell a story of thousands of sailors who made their living taking risks in some of the world's most treacherous waters. And I call those images there my shipwreck parade, and because there's such a variety of different vessels that you can see there, from wooden to steel, from deep to shallow, like the shallow shipwreck here, the Portland, an old wooden schooner sank in a storm in 1877. You can see how shallow and accessible it is. It's only about 10 feet deep. You can see the top of the water there. So one of the first questions people ask is why? Why are there so many shipwrecks concentrated in northwestern Lake Huron? Well, many factors led to all the shipwrecks here. High traffic, of course. We talked already about a busy waterway. So where the Thunder Bay and northwestern Lake Huron are located is right in the middle of the Great Lakes. So any vessel Commercial vessels traveling upbound, north or downbound to the east and the south must pass by Thunder Bay. So we had a lot of collisions. And then, of course, weather. We say they don't call it Thunder Bay for nothing. So it's known for sudden fog, of course, terrible storms. The 30-foot high waves have been recorded, 90-mile-an-hour winds, and ice, like we're seeing build up out there today. And then the topography is one of the third main factors. It's known for shallow, rocky shoals that if you don't know your way and you get off course because of a terrible fog, you may run aground. But it's not just the quantity. We talked about almost 100 wrecks and many more to be found, or the variety that we've touched on that makes Thunder Bay oops, back up there. I'm not ready to tell that fascinating story that make Thunder Bay a world-class, historically significant collection of artifacts. It's also the preservation. I talked about that a little bit. You know, the cold, fresh water, perfect for preserving materials, whether they're wood or metal, where if you had these archaeological sites in the ocean, they would definitely be rusted out and deteriorate, eaten away by the critters in the sea. But what might really be the most important aspect and feature of this collection of artifacts is the accessibility. I'll go back to some of these shallow images. Only about 1% of the population actually scuba dive. But if you're a paddler, you can visit these wrecks. You can see how close the side wheeler Albany here lies from the shoreline, and how clear that water is. So very, very accessible. And we do think that's one of the most important parts of the collection, is that people can connect to these sites. And what better way to encourage someone to protect and preserve something but by connecting to it. So the accessibility, here's another very shallow shipwreck. This is the steel freighter Nordmeer, which ran aground in 1966. So it's our most recent large shipwreck within sanctuary waters, and it's only about 30 feet deep. So another amazing accessible site. We'll touch on other ways you can access the collection, of course, which I know is of interest to museum studies people accessing the collection that you're in charge of. But let's tell some of those shipwreck stories. This here, I mentioned the Nordmeer, that big German steel freighter, was the most recent wreck in sanctuary waters, 1966. The New Orleans side wheeler is the earliest documented so far in sanctuary waters. So on a single day when the New Orleans was running in 1838, a fleet of side wheelers could carry 5,000 people from Buffalo to the west, to the western Great Lakes. And we talked about when the Erie Canal opened, that's when people were heading west to start a new life and looking for the opportunity. So the New Orleans was one of these paddle boats that moved tens of thousands of newly arrived immigrants. Is 160 feet long, and it was carrying nearly 300 people from Buffalo, New York, to Lake Michigan ports on June 14th, 1849. It blundered off course in one of those sudden fogs in June and ran onto the shoals at Sugar Island, which is just outside of Thunder Bay, so just 10 miles straight out from where I'm sitting right now. The residents on Thunder Bay Island, there was a fishing community at that time, were able to safely remove all the passengers and the crew before the New Orleans started to break up. So just imagine it's run aground, it's just, listing, got to get off of it before the waves will come and break it up. They even were able to recover the cargo and take it back to Detroit with other passing vessels and steamers. I love this image here by a maritime historian and artist, Robert McGreevy, just a beautiful image of the New Orleans steaming along. So they recovered the cargo, but not the people. In fact, most of the passengers were left stranded. And the day after the sinking, a passing steamer, the Globe, did offer to transport those that were stranded for a fee. Many that were stranded could not afford to pay, and they had, spent all their money possibly on their provisions and a ticket just to head west. And so they had to survive for up to a week without shelter and with limited food on the pretty small Thunder Bay Island. According to the June 19, 1849 Milwaukee Sentinel and Gazette, much suffering and privation among the passengers on the island in consequence of scarcity of provisions and from exposure to the weather, being forced to remain in the open air with nothing but pine boughs to shelter them. So several captains passed the island, and it wasn't until Captain Pierce of the Nile was very generous and compassionate and risked his vessel. So he had to get in shallow water and his schedule. I mean, they're on a schedule and that's money to pick up the rest of the passengers. So just one of those snapshots of history that you can see in our collection, in the Sanctuary Shipwreck Collection. This is what the New Orleans looks like today in very shallow water, just off the shores of Thunder Bay Island. This is taken from a plane, another testament to the cold, clear water. And you can also see a little white dot pretty much right in the middle. That is the mooring buoy, the sanctuary mooring buoy that is placed at the site of the New Orleans every season to encourage safe access for paddlers, boaters, of course, scuba divers. The massive steam engine was recovered for installation on another boat, but that oak hull is still lying there scattered among the islands, and it's a fascinating site to visit. I've both snorkeled and scuba dove it, but there's heavy framing still evident, still machinery supports. What's called a sponson, which is what protected that side wheel, is still evident. So fascinating features that archaeologists love to look at to help identify the vessel. So here's just some great images of what those structures look like, and a scuba diver exploring. Right there is that sponson I was telling you about, that rounded, curved timbers. So it might surprise you, but we have mapped to high resolution, at least less than 20% of the 4,300 square miles of sanctuary waters. So our number one goal is to go out and continue to map, which means go out and find shipwrecks, to use the latest technology to map and understand the lake bottom. I mentioned we've found nearly 100, and how exciting is it that we're still finding more shipwrecks? Of course, these are the deeper shipwrecks. And we partner, as a part of NOAA and as part of the National Marine Sanctuary System, we leverage our partnerships to get the funds, to get the people, to get the vessels that you see here, and of course the marine technology to go out and find these shipwrecks. Our most recent discoveries were made possible through these partnerships in 2017. Here we have an historical image of the Choctaw, and fascinating, very historically significant semi-whaleback that sank in a tragic sinking, and it was lost in 1915 off of Presqu'île. And so that's just a little bit north of where I am here in Alpena today. And there's a collection of deep water shipwrecks out there that are pretty much all victims of collisions, because that was like your interstate of shipping traffic. And here's an image of the side scan sonar that was captured and what the Choctaw looks like on the bottom today. And you can see from that image, which was collected using sound waves to go out. And then as the sound waves come back to the computer screen and come back to the sensors, you're able to see what the lake bottom looks like. And then you see these, that's how we find our shipwrecks. This one looks like a dart, just as it sank, dove right into that silt and clay that's on the bottom of Lake Huron. And from measuring from that sonar image, we estimate that is sticking up about 60 feet high off the lake bottom. Another discovery in our 2017 project was the Ohio, another tragic sinking, another tragic collision with the Ironton, and deep water shipwreck, a wooden bulk carrier that was over 200 feet long and was built in 1873. Fascinating site. Also very deep, almost 300 feet deep. Here is a video. Let's see if that will play. So this was taken from a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, that is a really critical part of both our exploration programs and research, but also our educational programs. So I'll touch on the educational programs and ROVs here in a bit. But what you see here is the ROV captured video footage of what the Ohio looks like on the lake bottom. You might notice it's covered in mussels, those invasive zebra and quagga mussels. I believe probably those are all quagga mussels at that depth, but still very, very well preserved and still very intact. Look at how high the mass reach from the lake bottom there. So we're still finding shipwrecks, and we're still, of course, partnering with people to look for them. Oh, I did want to mention, here's a couple of newspaper clippings from the sinking of the Ohio that had collided with the Ironton. And of course, when we found the Ohio, we're like, well, Ironton's got to be nearby. Let's go find that schooner. And the Ironton is yet to be found. So still out there looking for ships. Now, what you're looking at here is our next big research project. I would have had more of an update if 2020 wasn't a wash, as we all know it was. But in May of 2019, we dove back looking for shipwrecks and understanding what the lake bottom looked like. And just for a couple of minutes, I want to share how important that characterization of the lake bottom can be, and not just for looking for shipwrecks. I mentioned that we necessarily partner with different NOAA agencies, different universities to get our work done, and that's important because they're looking for different things in the lake bottom. Of course, when we go out and map, we want to make sure that this data is usable for other scientists. We're looking for shipwrecks. Biologists are looking to characterize fish habitats, benthic or lake bottom habitats. Geologists are searching for sinkholes, what the lake bottom looks like. So we go out there and we partner, and then we're able to map. And what you're seeing here is the port of Rogers City, north of Alpena, a small, beautiful town on the shores of Lake Huron. And the big white vessel there is the Sanctuaries research vessel Storm, operated by NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory, which is right there in Ann Arbor, the offices. And what the Storm is doing is towing behind it an ASV, so an autonomous surface vessel. I was talking about the ROVs earlier. Those are tethered to the vessel. This is an ASV, so it's not tethered. You program it, it's super smart, and it goes out and does what you tell it to do, which is map the lake bottom. So this particular project, May of 2019, we partnered with the University of New Hampshire Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping, and also Dr. Robert Ballard's Ocean Exploration Trust. Dr. Robert Ballard may sound familiar to you. He's quite famous for discovering the Titanic. Super happy to have him here working with us in the Great Lakes, his group. So this, what you're looking at here, is some of the latest autonomous exploration technology. They send vessels like that little yellow guy out into the ocean to map, very similar to the lakes, the ocean. There's so much left to discover out there, so still mapping out there. In fact, I think less than 10%. I'm sure I'm going to get that number wrong. But so what the yellow one is, his name is actually Ben, ASV Ben, which stands for Bathymetric Explorer and Navigator. And it can be remotely piloted. It's just fascinating to see this technology in action. Here's the list of the partners that made this project possible, and a different view of the Rogers City Marina. You might notice Ben there, which is about 12 feet long. In right next to its control van. That's like the mission ops right there, and everything is done within that white container, that white trailer. Here we are unhooking it and sending it Ben on his way to go map the lake bottom. Here we are. So it can be, this is the team from University of New Hampshire Coastal and Ocean Mapping Group, and they're piloting it there with that blue thing around Andy McLeod's neck there, and he's piloting it. It's way out in the lake. He's getting the data in real time back to that control van. And so here's some of the products. This is what we're looking for, what we're getting from Ben as he goes out and explores. This is a processed bathymetry map. So bathymetry is just what the lake bottom looks like, the ocean bottom looks like, and the varying colors indicate the different heights of interesting lake bed features. And it may be used, like I talked about, to characterize lake bed and habitats. And of course, if there were a shipwreck there, you hopefully would see it. Here's another multi-beam image of a known shipwreck within Thunder Bay. This is the William P. Rend, and it's only in about 18 feet of water, but you can clearly see the products that we're looking for when we do this type of survey of the lake bottom. And here's the side scan. So comparing the multi-beam image and the side scan image, and these are both very useful tools to see what's down there. And here's a historical image of the William P. Rend. And like I said, only about 18 feet deep. So another very accessible shipwreck. And so here's another product that we uh, look for, that we use, that archaeologists use to not only document, but also to monitor the archaeological sites under the water here in Lake Huron. This is the Monahanset. And so archaeologists traditionally would go out and take tape measures and slates and pencils. You can write with a pencil underwater and erase, and just measure, and actually measure every nut and bolt and planking, and really get a full impression of the context of your shipwreck site. And then we go back as we can, and of course invite citizen scientists, other universities, divers, to come and help monitor, so we can monitor how this site changes over time. So these products are very useful in our visitor center, which you see here on the left. This is 10,000 square feet of the Great Lakes Maritime Heritage Center, and free and open usually all year. Unfortunately, we haven't been open this past year, but hoping to open up again soon. We get almost 100,000 people through the doors of Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary's Visitor Center every year, which is very impressive considering where we are in Alpena up here, sort of a little bit off the beaten track. But if you're heading north to Mackinac, I highly recommend taking 23 instead of 75 and swinging into Alpena and checking out the visitor center, where you can also experience another very accessible way to see these shipwrecks, which is on a glass bottom boat. The Friends of Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary operate that glass bottom boat, the Lady Michigan, that you see there. And amazing way to really get more people out there connecting with these shipwreck sites. And the Monahanset is the shipwreck that you see below the glass bottom boat there. So scooting along here, here's another image, aerial shot of that glass bottom boat over the William P. Rend, that historic vessel I showed you earlier, and that had the multi-beam image and the side scan, giving you a good idea of the scale of that wooden freighter. I think it's almost 300 feet long. And so accessibility, I just want to talk a little bit more about the accessibility of these shipwrecks. This is my nephew here from Montana visiting one of the amazing shipwreck sites that we have here in Thunder Bay. And the accessibility has been our management philosophy. If you look to other marine protected areas around the world, around the country, there's varying types of philosophies on providing access to these archaeological sites, because they are archaeological sites. They can't be disturbed. They must be protected. They should be protected, just like historical sites on land, historical artifacts in museums. And the philosophies range from some countries, some places won't even publish where sites are. They won't allow access. We have found very similar to Jacques Cousteau's philosophy, that, or exactly like Jacques Cousteau's philosophy, learned from him, of course, that people will protect what they love. And if they don't understand it, if they don't know about it, if they don't know those rich stories that connect them to it, they're going to be much less likely to be engaged and to protect it. So this is the overview truly of Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary and the work we do. I know it's only about 12:30, but I would love to open it up for questions. We could go in the museums angle for sure. We can go in our education program angle, whatever the audience is interested in.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
We have already a number of questions in the Q&A there. So if you have a question, any of you who have been listening to Stephanie's presentation, feel free to add them there. And I'll start with one that we received as an email. And that has to do with, what does it mean looking at science around climate change and the work that you are doing at the sanctuary?
That's a great question, because and I didn't touch on this too much, but it gives me the opportunity to talk about our National Marine Sanctuary system as a whole. So we have a wide variety of environments and ecosystems that are within the sanctuary system. Was mentioned in the beginning that the Thunder Bay is the only freshwater one. That means that there are 13 other saltwater national marine sanctuaries in the ocean, and then 2 national marine monuments. So over 600,000 square miles. And these sites range from the West Coast. There's 4 off the shores of California to the East Coast, Stillwagon Bank, Monitor National Marine Sanctuary, which was the first national marine sanctuary designated in 1975, which protects the Civil War ship, the Monitor, down to Florida Keys, Gulf of Mexico, and we do have 1 national marine sanctuary just south of the equator in American Samoa. So with all that variety, of course, climate change is at the top of our list to understand its effects on national marine sanctuaries. So since I'm not a biologist, I don't have more than we know that ocean acidification is affecting biological and natural resources. So sea level rise, warming ocean, all of those things. And I guess to answer that question, this year in particular, we are super excited within the National Marine Sanctuary System to really understand better the effects of climate change on those resources. Now, a little bit more of a extrapolation on that is that how does climate change affect cultural resources? And of course it does, but it's maybe a little bit harder to quantify. I think soon we're going to wrap our brains around it better. For example, in Florida, they're a forerunner of documenting the effects of climate change, sea level rise, hurricanes, which are increasing due to warming ocean, on shipwreck sites, shallow shipwreck sites, and also hurricanes can move massive, massive ships, hundreds of feet long, and of course that's affecting the site itself. In the Great Lakes, we know we have changing lake levels and changing ice conditions, and our shallow sites, like I mentioned, we have many. If they become exposed, or if their conditions change, it of course will definitely have an effect. So once a wooden schooner becomes exposed to the air, it's going to deteriorate much more rapidly. So there are very serious issues facing sanctuaries, and it's at probably the forefront of our minds to continue our research and continue partnering with people that want to study those things.
An ongoing effort.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bunch of questions here, and maybe what I'll do, Stephanie, is I'll just go through some of them. And so the first is there a list of wrecks that we are aware of from historical records that have not yet been actually found? So you mentioned 1. Are there others?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of resources out there in the Great Lakes, and some amazing people doing research. A lot of people are out there looking for wrecks, and so I can we have a Thunder Bay Sanctuary research collection housed here at the Alpena County Library, and we partner with them to manage that collection, started by C. Patrick Labadie, an amazing collection of thousands and thousands of ship files. Those types of collections throughout the Great Lakes would be a good place to start. And there's many. So yes, I wish I had my hands on like a definitive list. And we do know there are projected losses that we know are out there and that we do go look for.
Thank you. And then the next question has to do with artifacts predating the 1600s. So predating Marquette founding Sault Ste. Marie.
And so I am not well versed in that at all. It is my focus, or not my focus, my desire as the research coordinator to understand the pre-contact archaeological sites better. However, once again, with our partnerships, we're able to facilitate research about that very thing here in Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Dr. John O'Shea, who works is a professor at the University of Michigan, has a fascinating project. In fact, we're hoping to get out in the water this coming season, and help him continue his research on the Alpena Amberley Ridge, which is right in the middle of Lake Huron, and over 10,000 years ago was above water. And Dr. John O'Shea's research explores and hypothesizes that this area was once hunting lanes for caribou. And he has recovered quite a few micro artifacts, lithics from the Alpena Amberley Ridge. Fascinating project. And I think there's an exhibit right on campus there all about that.
Thank you. The next question is also related to sort of First Nations. And in this case, the question has to do with the impact on fishing communities and Indigenous fishing communities, and if your work dealing with protecting, studying these shipwrecks, how those two might intermingle, or how that works out.
That's a great question. So the easy answer is that our regulations have no effect or don't really connect with any of the fishing regulations, which is good. You know, it's not something that those things are already managed very well by the state and the tribal organizations. So however, of course, there is the fishing heritage that is a part of, I mentioned the maritime cultural landscape that is Thunder Bay here. That fishing heritage is a big part of that and a rich part of that. And here in Alpena, the Besser Museum does a good job of talking about the fisheries heritage. And then Michigan Sea Grant, one of our amazing partners, also has partnered with many others to produce the Great Lakes. I'm not going to get the name right. Fisheries Heritage Trail, I think. And that includes Thunder Bay sites, but also includes sites all around the Great Lakes. So as far as current fishing regulations, we really have nothing to do with, but we do work to celebrate the rich heritage of fishing and are always looking to do more on that and should do more.
Wonderful. Maybe this is a quick question. What is the water temperature at 300 feet?
Ooh, really cold. I actually only dive to about 130, but I think it's the same at 130, 300, you know, year round, it's going to probably be about high 30s.
Whew. Yes, very cold. In your presentation, you touched on this idea of accessibility a number of times. And as you rightly said, this is of great interest to those of us who work in museum studies. And the next question has to do with this. And the idea that there might be a different definition or criteria for accessibility depending on the audience, and how you actively preserve the objects and document them, while also, where that balance happens.
Yeah, right. It's a tricky one, and it's an ongoing, aspect of our charge that I think we consider, because different sites, how do you say it? You want to have accessibility maybe different for different sites. Some sites are maybe not as unique. Some sites are less fragile. Some sites are very, very fragile. And how do you balance that? I don't know if I have an easy answer to that. I mean, I like that point that you made, that it's different definitions of accessibility. We strive to make our history our history here with the commercial vessels of the last couple hundred years virtually accessible. And that's much easier. And the technology is advancing so fast on that you don't even have to come to North America, and you can, fly in a simulated 360 virtual reality dive of one of our shipwrecks, the DM Wilson. And if you search DM Wilson 360 shipwreck fly through, you'll get there. It's fascinating. In fact, National Marine Sanctuaries have launched a 360 filming program where they're going around to sites and filming the coral reefs in 360. So I got off track a little bit there, but yes, accessibility is huge, and it's changing, and it's different definitions. And I think most people like I mentioned, aren't going to be scuba diving. So how do we bring it to them? So that's really the philosophy, protecting the sites while bringing the richness of it to our audiences.
Thank you. The next question has to do with aquatic wildlife, and if you could say something about what you find in the sanctuary.
Aha, that's a great question. So I'm generally not focused on the critters, and it's you might think, you see images of coral reefs with so many fish around, and then you see images of those shipwrecks I showed you, and you see mussels. Where are the fish? There are fish. I guess they scatter when you go to take a photo, but what I've seen, I mean, there's, and I know this just in partnership with our other amazing NOAA partners at Sea Grant. I believe there's like 180 species in Lake Huron, and we'll see your typical fish. We'll see walleye. There's burbot. I don't know if you know what burbot are, that they're really tasty freshwater cod. They like to hang out in deep water, and they also like to hang out at shipwrecks. And then you see perch, you see smallmouth bass. I'll see those on wreck sites quite often. And goby, the invasive goby. Unfortunately, you see those every dive. I'll see those. I'm not sure if that's what they were looking for the question. Okay.
I think, yes, I think that's very helpful. And something I'm just noting in many of your responses is the other organizations that the sanctuary is constantly collaborating and partnering with. It's just fantastic. So let's see, I've got a couple of questions. How deep is the Choctaw?
It's about 300 feet deep.
Okay. So that's at those super cold temperatures.
Yes.
And then maybe related to those cold temperatures, the question is, how long is it estimated that these wrecks will stay intact? Are there currents, et cetera, that would affect the structural integrity?
Great question. And those sites, I did throw an image up, and I didn't talk about it, with the mast still standing up on that one schooner. That's about 185-foot deep wreck. The Defiance sank in a collision. Wooden schooner, the mast standing upright. So those are the sites that are very fragile, that you wonder how long are those masts gonna stay 90 feet up in the water column? And there's other things besides current that can affect those. People grappling the wreck, that could pull down a mast, or affect any timber on a vessel. As far as currents, there are currents in the Great Lakes. It doesn't really compare to the very swift currents that can move things, but they definitely still are there. And that is our job. So I'm giving you sort of a roundabout answer that it's hard to say how long they will be there. And so that leads to our dedication to making sure to document them and preserve them in that fashion. And they've been there, they will deteriorate. They definitely will deteriorate. And, but that Defiance one, that's been there for now 170 years, and its masts are still standing upright. So the vague, long, roundabout answer is we don't really know exactly how long, but our work goes to documenting them to monitor and track that and preserve it. And we'll have those answers better in 100 years.
Yeah, and I guess related, another question to deal with this preservation and degradation are things like you mentioned invasive species, right? That this is potentially a problem generally in the Great Lakes, but other pollutants, industrial pollutants, are these things that you're having to deal with in the sanctuary directly?
Actually, no. And I know they're out there, and I know there's studies. And as we continue our partnerships and continue to work towards facilitating more research, I think that's we will become more connected to it. We have been, as this was our 20th anniversary last year, so that's a long time, but it also really isn't. So we're working to continue to broaden and develop our scientific research that happens in the sanctuary, which then definitely I think will include more connection to those pollutants. There have been studies that we've helped with uh, collecting mussels, that because they're such a good indicator of what the water quality is, because they filter everything. And so, as our dive team has helped biologists study around the lakes, actually, but our contribution really is just kind of divers and kind of another tool to go down and collect them. But it's an excellent point, and something we'd like to connect with more.
Ongoing, as are most of these efforts.
Right.
Uh, there's another question here, maybe related to the early one about indigenous fishing, but how much work do you or do others within the sanctuary community work with indigenous communities in interpreting the history of Thunder Bay?
Not enough. Absolutely not enough. It's something that we are, talking about the sanctuary system as a whole. It's so diverse in the ecosystems it protects, but also those connections across the sanctuary. So some of our sites are doing it top notch and very well, and we look to them to learn from how they do it. Papahanaumokuakea is a marine national monument in the South Pacific that is super connected to the native peoples there, and incorporates it very much into their sanctuary management, incorporates their input, more than that, into the sanctuary management. We do have a seat on our sanctuary advisory council, for tribal members, and it's taken, and it's we do communicate with them. It's a very open dialogue. It's just it seems like it hasn't been explored enough. We haven't found the historical the prehistorical artifacts that have driven us to do that. I mean, I think it's also a matter of time, unfortunately. So not a great answer, and it's something that we again rely on our partners. Once again, Michigan Sea Grant does a great job of connecting to those communities. So hoping to learn from them even more.
Sounds wonderful. So a couple of very specific questions, and our audience members, excuse you if you don't know the answers. So one has to do with the Hudson, which was lost in Lake Superior in 1901. I don't know if
I don't.
the individual asked the question, the captain was his great grandfather.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
That
there's,
is super cool.
all right. And another question is about the Griffin, if it has been found.
No, the Griffin has not been found. I'm fortunate to work very closely with the state of Michigan underwater archaeologist Wayne Lusardi, who is stationed here in Thunder Bay, and he gets calls often that people may have found the Griffin, but not as of yet.
Okay.
The question about the Hudson, did you say, and the great grandfather, that makes me think of the discovery of the Choctaw in that I mentioned in 2017. And one of the highlights of my time here has been when I got an email after the discovery was announced, and this woman, Diane, said my great aunt, no, it was her aunt, was the granddaughter of Captain Fox, who was on the Choctaw when it sank. He did not perish in the sinking, but she says when she was a little girl, she remembers Captain Fox taught her grandpa talking about how horrifying the sinking was.
And that actually is a question too. So in the visitor center, how much are these personal stories and histories recounted?
Mm,
Uh,
that's a great question. I would say honestly, I mean, we could do that more. We have partnered with the Smithsonian. This has been quite a few years now, but for one of their traveling exhibits that was called Journey Stories, and efforts were made then to collect oral histories. And we collected a lot there. And so it's an online component. In the exhibits, however, it is focused more on the vessels. It really is. And that's another avenue that we'd love to explore more, is capturing those individual stories, because that's what makes it relevant, right? That's what makes, I mean, that's what I think is special about studying shipwrecks, is that Sometimes people are like, well, why, it's a little morbid, it's kind of tragic. But it also gives us, it does tell us about the seven people that did go down on the Ironton, and that is very tragic, and we respect that, and study it and share that. But these shipwreck stories are also a window into the lives of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that made their living on the Great Lakes, and lived, and are very similar to us and not captured in the history books. So I like to think of it that way too.
Yes, and I can imagine it's a real interpretive challenge. You've got this vast sanctuary, so many stories to tell, that it's maybe very difficult to choose exactly where you're going to focus your attentions. So, Stephanie, you've been so generous in answering all these questions. So maybe this will be the last one, because I imagine you probably need a long drink of water there. But this really is, again, about maybe the idea of accessibility, but sort of what's the top 10? What is it that visitors most want to see, hear, learn, and experience when they come to the sanctuary?
Oh, goodness, that's a great question. I mean, I think um, people love the glass bottom boat. I mean, it's 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and you're going to actually see a shipwreck. And I think that is probably the most exciting thing. That's a hard question. I mean, another answer would be programs like this. People want to talk to the scientists, and with, depending, doesn't even matter what research they're doing out in the lake, whether it's the Alpena Amberley Ridge. Professors from University of Michigan, also Gregory Dick, who does work at the Middle Island sinkhole, which is a fascinating place that I didn't really even touch on. So nothing to do with shipwrecks at all. But when our sinkhole scientists come to do a lecture, it packs the house. So people love to come to the visitor center and interact with scientists and interact with the history. And the last thing I'll say, as they're occurring to me, and bring it back to the ROVs I mentioned, we have an amazing educational program. So kids that live in Alpena in Northeast Michigan, all of them, have attended different field trips throughout their school lives, coming to the visitor center and building. The highlight probably is building these ROVs, building these underwater robots, and then actually piloting them and competing with them in an outdoor training tank we have. So those are just some of the really cool things that people can do, and that I think are probably the top of their list.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to encourage everyone, all of our visitors today, to visit the website for the Thunder Bay Sanctuary. And Stephanie, are there any other links you might recommend to our audience?
Certainly. So the sanctuaries, thunderbay.noaa.gov, will get you linked to all sorts of other places. And the research collection that's housed at the library is really super fun to explore. And we are actually right now in the middle of our Ocean and Great Lakes Film Festival. And there's lots of free Great Lakes content, and there's paid ocean content, and interactive discussions you can watch. So thunderbayfriends.org is where that's the gateway for the film festival. I would recommend those.
Thank you. Wonderful. So lots of food for thought. And again, Stephanie, thank you for joining us, for sharing your work and all of these ideas with us today for our Museums at Noon event.
Thank you so much for having me. It was super fun.
Thank you.